Welcome, Kim Marie. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, everyone at EA Zoom. It's wonderful to be back with you. Today, we are going to look at the Capricorn planets in aspect to the transiting nodes. And you will see on your screen, I'm going to include the planetary nodes as well. I have a gazillion things I want to talk about, so I'm going to try and get this in the next 75 minutes or so for you. And see how much of this material we can cover while we're in process of looking at these slides. And so give me a moment as I refresh myself with how I get my slides to work. There we go. All right, so let's just start out and refresh ourselves. Everybody's perhaps in the astrology world talking about the stellium between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto that's going to take place in 2020. You will see in red on your screen, these are the dates of the 5 conjunctions between these 3 planets. And then you will also see I've included the dates when they're transiting through Capricorn, as well as Jupiter and Saturn when they move into Aquarius and finally go a new phase to each other and to Pluto. Yahoo! I can't wait for that. And so first of all, I want to just refresh ourselves with this whole process of how evolutionary astrology looks at evolution. You can see here on your screen that we have basically 2 types. Uniform evolution is that slow step-by-step growth. The baby becomes the toddler, the child, the teenager, the adult, etc. We also will have what's called cataclysmic evolution. And this is basically when there's a resistance to change and growth, and that energy to evolve builds up until it overtakes the resistance, and it tends to create upheavals that really bring a change of events. In Earth, we can look at it as earthquakes, but as human beings, it can be that divorce, it can be the loss of the job, it can be all kinds of different things that can happen in our life. And so one of the things that I have observed over the 3 decades I've been with evolutionary astrology is that on an individual basis, when we're aware of all of these upcoming transits and aspects to our natal chart, we can turn that into proactivity, and we can work with the intents of the archetypes and make the changes that we keep getting these intuitive hits on in regards to how we need to evolve in our life some way. However, collectively in consensus societies, it's that approximately 7 out of 10 souls you observe on planet Earth anywhere, there is a tendency to want to resist change in order to feel secure. And so what will happen on these broad collective levels is society has a tendency to react to these planetary transits and aspects after the events, after the transit. In astrology, we all know that there's an orb of influence when something comes along by transit or an aspect. But again, so society has to kind of behind the curveball, so to speak. And so eventually what happens is uniform evolution is overridden by cataclysmic evolution in order to create the necessary changes we have by a group of people, a country, a community, and even all of us as the various species on planet Earth. So again, we as individuals can work with the changes, especially if we use our will to do so, but collectively consensus society doesn't. It's why evolution has a tendency to be so slow for us. And I also just want to say, bottom of the screen here you can see the intent of the archetypes can be distorted or naturally expressed. We're not guaranteed with all the intensity over the next few years that we are literally going to make leaps of growth forward. It is going to be up to all of us individually and collectively and our free will choices in those regards as to how all of this turns out. We're going to explore a lot of the themes of what is up for change right now. I also want to just kind of lay some groundwork here in this phrase called the Capricorn Compressions. And nowhere are we seeing this reflected more than the fact that Saturn is in a balsamic conjunction aspect to Pluto. You can see here their stationary retrogrades in late April. They were only 2.5 degrees away from each other. When they go direct here in September, October, they'll be about 6 degrees apart. And then, of course, they're going to have that one conjunction January 12th at about 2020 at about 23 degrees Capricorn. So throughout 2019, we're going to see shifts in collective realities, not to mention personally as well, but we're going to see collective realities that are changing overnight. That's that cataclysmic stuff that tends to happen. And slow pendulum swings, a group of people that change their political persuasion with some political leader in some country on planet Earth. And by the way, I always like to say I'm from the United States, so I want to thank all you international listeners for allowing me to use the US as an example. Appreciate that. So it's almost like every area in our life, because Saturn is the individuated consciousness, and it's the boundaries of space-time reality. All these planets, as they're collecting in Capricorn and the nodal axis transit there, every aspect of life, reality, is kind of facing death of the old and rebirth of the new. And it's more intense because Jupiter's going to meet up with Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. And the nodal axis, North Node Cancer, South Node Capricorn, are laying some emotional groundwork for how we respond to these changing realities in our world. So it is intensifying week by week, month by month, as we go through 2019. You can almost think of it as the female who in 2019 is 8 months pregnant and she's going to give birth in 2020. And we don't know what's going to happen with that infant in 2021 yet. Time will tell. We're all going to live through it. So one of the best things that we can do right now over the next few years is surrender and adapt to whatever reality is showing up in our face, whatever's being presented to us as this isn't working anymore. So how can you surrender or let it go and move on? We also, though, can pay attention to the intuitive hits of change that pop up in our consciousness, because anytime you have two planets finishing up a cycle in a balsamic conjunction, the new phase conjunction and its intuitive hits are coming through. We have a tendency to want to race ahead and create it right away, and space-time reality, Capricorn, is saying, not yet. We're going to really make sure that you go through this contraction, death, and dying process so that you can't go back to the past and cling to it or repeat it and project it forward. So during this time period, and especially with Saturn and Pluto right now, depression and involution are a natural part of Capricorn, especially when those outer realities and circumstances and relationships and situations are just no longer working. And what happens is that involution throws us inward for emotional reflection, which is that Cancer polarity, which is emphasized right now with Saturn and Pluto retrograde, transiting North Node in Cancer. And so when we go inward and have that deep emotional reflection, we become aware of why we've acted the way we have. What is driving us on an inner level to create the current reality? And if that current reality no longer works, then what is it we have to change on an inner level to change the outer world? And so another thing that is very good for us at this time period is to ask that famous Pluto question, why? Why is this particular situation happening in my world? Why is this reality no longer functioning for me? Asking question invites answer. Asking why, again, helps you understand those internal dynamics of why you operate the way you do so that you can change the way you operate. inwardly and outwardly. We also, because Capricorn is a cardinal reality, have to make that effort to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Going forward. How do I move forward? How do I move forward? Over the last 6 months, my husband and I have decided anytime we're overwhelmed, anytime we're frustrated, anytime something's not working, we just ask the question, okay, how do I move forward? How do I move forward? How do I move forward? And we do that in the tiny little ways, from doing the dishes to those big changes that you have coming along in your life in whatever ways. I also want to stress that not everything that's going to be happening this year or the next few years, it's not all bad news. Some of this breaking down is a lot of those old patriarchal distortions we don't want anything to do with anymore. You know, probably that is the case for most of us who listen to this webinar. We want these old realities to break down. We want to create new laws, new structures, new norms, new customs, all Capricorn words on planet Earth. So again, as I said, for those of us who have personally been trying to be in touch with these changes coming in our world, going inward emotionally and asking, what is it I need to know and feel and then do differently? We have opportunity here. We can really have some beautiful soul growth. You can see on your screen, we can make progress with our career and our work. We can have deep healings in the origins of our family. We can create resource stability no matter how chaotic it is. I'll have more to say on that. We can be in touch with all those new realities and structures that are emerging, and we can be that groundswell that helps create it, personally and collectively. As we know, natural law, every ending is just opening up space for a new beginning. How well can you use your will to go into the unknown and not project the path forward? Now, here are those dates for Cancer-Capricorn. For time's sake, I won't be able to go into everything. However, I have a 2-hour webinar that I did last fall on the transiting nodes in Cancer-Capricorn. And I am giving you access to this so that you can go watch this for free. And by the way, those dates on the screen, 2001, 83, those are the last times Cancer, North Node was in Cancer, South Node was in Capricorn. So you can go there and get a lot more detail on this nodal axis transit that we have another year to go yet. Enjoy it. However, let's look at this one. This is germane to the transits of the nodal axis in regards to the signs and the rulers of those signs. Wherever the transiting signs of the nodal axis are in your chart, meaning whichever house or 2-house or maybe 3-house cusp they're traveling, that's going to show the surface or the apparent issues and lessons, whatever we think is going on. It is the planetary rulers of those transiting signs that are showing what are the deeper or actual issues and lessons that are taking place. And so the deeper lessons are always going to relate back to the natal chart. And in the case of the North Node transiting in Cancer, it's the deepest lessons are going to go back to the natal placement of your moon by house, sign, and aspect. In the case of the South Node in Capricorn, the ruler Saturn, wherever that is natally in your chart, that is where we're going to go back to learning those deepest egoic lessons we've got to let go of by natal house, sign, and aspect. So, in other words, with the transiting nodes in Cancer-Capricorn, the evolving ego of our soul, the nodal axis is the ego, South Node ego of the past, North Node ego we're striving to create. The evolving ego of our soul is releasing through Saturn and developing through the moon, wherever those are in our charts. And so, example, Kim Marie, Here's an example of a female whose mother had open heart surgery a little over 2 months ago. And for those of you who don't recognize the birth data, this is my chart. This is what Kim Marie's going through. And so, as you can see, there's a lot going on with just the Saturn-Pluto transits, but I want to use the example specific to the transiting nodes. And the March 13th was the date that my mother had a triple bypass. And while it wasn't emergency surgery, it happened in less than a week. So it felt like a pretty cataclysmic event in our world. If you look at that transiting South Node in Capricorn first, you know, this is where my own ego is having to work on myself, let go of some of the old realities in my world and how I look at myself and see myself. It could be a time period where I would really want to kind of be alone with myself. First house, yet the transiting North Node in Cancer, there could be all kinds of relationship situations going on that could be triggering me emotionally and perhaps making me, having me move towards deeper emotional self-reliance within me, regardless of relationship chaos. I won't go into the details, but I want to go to the rulers in my natal chart, for example, here. So as you can see, that natal Saturn has a Venus new phase conjunction in Sagittarius 11th house. The deeper issue of what I am having to deal with is really breaking free from all kinds of old beliefs within my familial family, especially according to this event that I'm relating it to. I ended up spending literally 2 weeks, 24 hours a day with my early Alzheimer's father. Consensus father, did not have an easy relationship with him as the oldest of 3 girls. And what so transformed for me in those 2 weeks with my dad, a week literally in the hospital hotel room because you cannot leave my father alone 24/7 with the memory care needed. And we don't have it. He's not there at a facility yet. He's not at that stage yet. I really was able to heal and release a lot of my pain with my father, and I developed more compassion for him than I have ever had in my life. It was just this beautiful gift that I did not expect as we were all concerned and helping my mother heal. That North Node, which is the ruler of North Node in Cancer, up there at 23 degrees Scorpio in my 10th house. I've always jokingly been called the mother of the family between my mom and my 2 sisters. I stepped into that in new roles. I also had to go through another wave of really facing my own mortality, being in my early 60s, and the life and death issues that my mother went through. Together, both of those have really evolved my relationship with both my parents and my relationship with myself and my own mortality, the own maturation of my soul, both in physical reality and on a deep emotional level. I could go on forever, but I just wanted to give you a brief example between the transits of the sign by house and those deep lessons by the rulers. Now, Cancer-Capricorn is always going to be dealing with animus, or the female and the male. And one of the biggest questions we can be asking of ourselves, and you just see it everywhere out there collectively, regardless of which of these planetary archetypes we're looking at, how do women balance their inner male? And how do men balance their inner female? So, on some of the deepest levels, our soul's evolution is always learning to balance the inner male and female, regardless of the current gender we have incarnated through. So just take a moment and reflect upon this for yourself, or reflect on it over the next few days or weeks or whatever. Whatever your gender is, how are you balancing in yourself? One of my most beautiful phrases is a poster I have of a Native American woman with a wolf. And it goes like this: nothing is as gentle as true strength, and nothing is as strong as true gentleness. And I always saw that as that anima-animus balancing that we all learn to do. So Cancer-Capricorn nodes, again, South Node Capricorn, North Node Cancer. All of the patriarchal distortions are being exposed in their extremes, emphasized by Saturn and Pluto, and soon Jupiter to follow. There will be continued efforts to maintain all the power and the control. Just look around you. And if you're in the United States, look what Mitch McConnell, who runs the Senate, said. You know, if a Supreme Court justice dies in 2020, he's going to confirm someone rather than force them to wait till the next election like he forced everybody to do in 2016 when we had a Supreme Court justice pass. Consensus nationalism and protectionism is being exposed worldwide. It's almost like they are sinking their teeth in while there's nothing left to eat. It's becoming more and more unsustainable, and we will see that more and more through the issue of climate change. It requires us to have some of our deepest levels of emotional self-reliance through any chaos. I get asked the question, well, what is emotional self-reliance, Kim Marie? Basically, you are the only person who can make yourself happy, and it doesn't matter what your circumstances are. It is up to you to love yourself, to take care of yourself, to make yourself happy. And oh, by the way, here's another phrase. Happiness is a choice, regardless of your circumstances. So here is where we have to evolve that inner security, North Node in Cancer, to handle all of the crumbling outer securities and outer realities, whatever the details are in our world. This will also include, with this nodal axis transit, healing all kinds of old familial wounds, like the one I just shared from my life. And doing this personally, doing this collectively, it is requiring us on a collective level to really evolve humanitarian policies on a variety of issues. How much more do we have to see going on in the world with people losing their homes through war and climate events and you name it? What's it going to take for all of us to say, everyone has a right to food, clothing, and shelter. Everyone has a right to have health care and not worry about, dying of disease because they can't afford it. Stay tuned. We'll see how this turns out. And of course, with these Cancer-Capricorn nodal axis transits, look at the animus issues that are going through with LGBTQ, gender equality, rise of women in politics, equal pay rights, taking care of the children, familial immigration, food issues, commodity tariffs, that's where I live, living wages that allow for survival, debt jubilees, rebuilding infrastructure, capitalism versus democratic socialism. Again, I'm on a roll. I'm going fast. Thank you for letting me do that, okay? Getting as much in as possible. But here's something I really want to share with you. I am slowly working my way through this brand new book. It is not the most easiest book to read, but if you really want some of the history of this thing we call debt jubilees, this is a fantastic book. This gentleman has been an economist for 30 years. Here's a quote from his book. The Bible is preoccupied with debt, not sin. Again and again, Jesus denounces the creditors. They were the sinners, not the debtors. That was the most important message that he had, according to Michael Hudson's research. In our history going back 3 to 15,000, maybe not even that far, let's say 3 to 10,000 years ago, it was common for pharaohs and kings to just totally wipe out the debts of the poor, because that's how they kept kept a stable population when they came into power. It was not common to wipe out the debts of the wealthy, because that would allow them to keep the inequality with the poor or those that didn't have as much wealth, and it would not allow for an equal sharing of the resources, namely land. Fascinating read. I've only started this book, but I recommend it for those of you who really want to read a little bit more technical stuff. And if not, I have been waiting 3 years for this book to come out. This is my heroine, Ellen Brown. Today, most of our money is created not by governments, but by banks when they make loans. This book takes the reader step by step through the sausage factory of modern money creation. It explores improvements made possible by advances in digital technology, and proposes upgrades that could transform our outmoded 19th century system into one that is democratic, sustainable, and serves the needs of the 21st century. I recommend every single one of you get this book, and I don't care what country you live in. Banking on the people. If any of you have followed me over the last dozen years of Pluto and Capricorn, you know that I am a strong advocate of the Public Banking Institute.org, which Ellen Brown created. It is based upon the Bank of North Dakota, which is just north of me in South Dakota, having a state-owned bank for 100 years. By the way, last month, they had their 15th year of having over an 18% return on their equity. And this is through the downturn in the oil, which is what everybody says is how North Dakota makes their money. Nope, it's not. So you can look at this later on the PowerPoints of everything and see all of the cities and states that are following North Dakota. And right now, among those at the Public Banking Institute, it's kind of turning into a little bit of a contest into which of those states is going to follow North Dakota and get to be second. I think it will go the way the wave of cannabis did in the United States. And I strongly invite you to go to the publicbankinginstitute.org as well. Learn, educate yourself, follow them. To me, this is the best news possible with all these Capricorn planets and redistributing resources from exclusive to inclusive. Now, here are the dates in which the transits of Saturn, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter will be making their conjunctions to the South Node in Capricorn and their oppositions to the North Node Cancer. We are looking at Saturn having 3 oppositions with its retrograde cycle, Pluto and Jupiter only 1. We had that first Saturn conjunction to the South Node April 27th. I went back and looked at details around the end of April time period. Joe Biden announced his presidency on the Democratic side April 25th. On April 27th, Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the nuclear arms treaty. That is scary. Stay tuned. Yeah, there's the warmongers that Trump has put around them that could really, really create some upset and chaos. And as I will say, Neptune and Pisces, pray for peace, pray peace, be peace, stomp your feet while you pray. These aspects that these planets are going to make to the South Node are going to serve as emotional triggers to all of these crumbling realities and circumstances that we have going on. And we're either going to re-imprint those old wounds, we're going to go back to trying to being, say for instance, an Aryan white race in the United States, or, you know, continuing to cast out immigrants, or, you know, you take your old Capricorn entrenched back to yesterday theme, and that can get triggered, and consensus in some ways will want to act upon that. Or with the oppositions, we have an opportunity to emotionally mature. And because it's the opposition, because it's the North Node and it's the point of unfamiliarity and insecurity. It will take emotional courage and emotional will to change. It's much easier to project the path forward. That's why we're going to have these intense aspects and create the cataclysms to hopefully change the landscape. As many of us say in evolutionary astrology, you can distort natural law, you can suppress natural law, but you cannot destroy it. And so sooner or later, the climate change swings are going to force us to change to more inclusive ways of living. It's the only way that species will survive on planet Earth, including the two-legged. We also then, on the collective level, want to recognize that we all survive better together. And I've always said, with all of the inequalities, especially financially with the Capricorn distortions, the Cancer archetype is the community. And we can distort Cancer into protectionism and nationalism. But Cancer is also that community where you get along with your neighbor, even though you vote opposite at the ballot box. You're next door to each other. You know that, hey, I want you to give me a helping hand if my basement's flooded. And so that type of energy also exists on a collective level. And I've always said that these changes are going to come from the grassroots up as the public sees their world break down on all of these different personal levels that you see on your screen. I'm not giving up on the humanitarian collective being able to wake up. The consensus state of consciousness can be just as loving and giving as individuating and spirituating. It's just a matter of changing environmental conditionings. And I think this is a good time period these next few years in which maybe we could do that. I also just wanted to point out, this might be a little I just want to point out that these planets in Cancer, Capricorn are the cardinal modality. And cardinal is that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It always wants to go forward till it gets insecure, then it retreats to security until it can't handle it anymore. Bored, been there, done that, wants to move forward again, wants to break free. So wherever you have planets in Cancer, Capricorn, they're, yes, going to be very activated. But so are the planets in Aries and Libra that have the squares to Cancer, Capricorn. So anywhere you have planets in those 4 cardinal modality archetypes, you're going to be a little more impacted, activated, triggered to change than maybe somebody who doesn't have very many planets in those archetypes. Just so happens that cardinal modality is quite active in the United States chart and Donald Trump's chart. More on that later. But at this point, what I want to do is bring in the planetary nodes. And this is something that I think most people find through evolutionary astrology, and it's becoming more and more known in the general field of astrology. And this is basically that all planets have ascending and descending paths around the ecliptic. The north node of the moon is where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic and goes above it. 2 weeks later, the moon's path crosses south the ecliptic and goes below it. The ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun around Earth. All planets have a south node, north node. However, all the other planets, moon's pretty close to Earth, all the other planets are so far away, their nodes are not exactly opposite. And those degrees range a lot in any given calendar year. So you basically have to have the ephemeris to get the specific date and an actual degree. And so here is how you do it in SolarFire, which is the astrology software that that is most probably well used for the planetary nodes. And I'll let you just refer to this later if you want. But here is example for you. The transiting south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all in Capricorn for hundreds of years. In 2019, Jupiter's south node in Capricorn ranges from 0 to 19 degrees. Saturn's south node Cap, 20 to 28. Pluto's south node in Capricorn, 19 to 22 degrees. In the same respect, transiting north nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all in Cancer for hundreds of years. In 2019, Jupiter ranges from 0 to 19 degrees, Saturn from 19 to 28 degrees, and Pluto from 19 to 21 degrees. In other words, they're transiting south nodes and north nodes are also moving through Cancer, Capricorn as well. And so what we have going on here, I call it the Capricorn Onslaught. Transiting Jupiter will be 2020, but Saturn and joining Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, those three planets are going to conjunct the transiting south node in Capricorn. You saw those dates earlier. They are going to conjunct their own south nodes and the south nodes of each other in Capricorn. They will also conjunct the natal south node for all souls alive. One exception, rarely, there are a few charts where the south node of Jupiter's in Sag and the north node of Jupiter's in Gemini. So they're going to conjunct the natal south node of the US 1776 chart. Are you tired yet? They will also then, transiting Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, oppose the north nodes of transiting Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Cancer. Whoops, excuse me, this should be Cancer. I got a little mistake here. I'm going to make a little note here for myself so I can change my PowerPoint slide. If you want the PDF of this and you can't get it, you can always email me or email evolutionaryastrology.net. I'd be happy to email you this PowerPoint PDF. It's going to oppose those north nodes for all souls alive, oppose the north node for the US 1776 chart. So I couldn't give this class without including the planetary nodes because they are also going on and activating things so deeply. So with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto having the south nodes in Capricorn, from the perspective of EA, this relates to where human souls as a collective participated in the shift from natural law or matriarchal principles to the patriarchal distortions. Or another way of saying this, where we shifted from inclusive to exclusive principles of understanding. And in EA, there is the understanding that this shift happened during the sub-age of Capricorn, during the age of Cancer, which is approximately 7,500 to 6,500 BC. So, as these three planets transit the south nodes of the moon and their own south nodes and each other's south nodes, can you see the potential to review? Can you see how we will try to cling to these old patriarchal distortions and yet they cannot sustain us? Well, they're going to sustain us for a while, but if we don't change, we might burn up. We might find half of the planet becomes unlivable. And so it really brings things into almost a cataclysmic focus of consciousness for all souls on planet Earth. Wait a minute, what am I going to do? If we're into the fear, it's going to be me versus you or us versus them. Can we recognize that we survive better together when we all play in the same sandbox? And so these distortions are in full exposure. How extreme will it go? Again, that return to more natural principles is not guaranteed. It is going to depend upon our human will and our participation. How are you going to choose to actively participate? in the same respect that north node of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto is, or excuse me, the north nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are in Cancer, okay? And they have that potential to honor and nurture both genders equally, as well as planet Earth, all species on planet Earth. They get activated when planets transit Cancer. They can be activated from the squares of Aries and Libra. They can be activated by all these planets in Capricorn as well. The whole thing about the North Node in Cancer is that potential to return to more inclusive principles individually, socially, and collectively. But of course, we can have all of those distortions of Cancer, the protectionism, the nationalism that we see going on that we were talking about. Here again, how extreme does it get before we change? In the United States, you know, how many churches and synagogues and I'm forgetting the Islam word right now. How many shootings do we have to have in those places of worship before enough people rise up and say, no more? We are going to have healthy gun control. By the way, thank you, New Zealand. I really appreciate what you're doing down there. So I just wanted to point out how much is going on. Here's the U.S. chart as an example. Yeah, and if that wasn't enough, let's add one more thing in. We also have transiting Pluto in Capricorn, getting ready to make the first conjunction in the United States lifetime to its natal Capricorn at 27.5 degrees. I use the Gemini rising chart. All of this is active. If you use the Sagittarius rising Sibley chart, doesn't matter which 1776 chart you want to use. But the United States it's even more intense for this country because transiting Pluto and transiting Saturn are balsamic, our natal Pluto. And so it's intensifying what isn't working anymore. And the consensus powers that be are trying even harder yet to cling to these extremes of the past to, you know, the point that the young ones are rolling their eyes and going, you know, to be blunt, when are you guys going to go back to spirit world? So here's the south nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in the U.S. chart, and the north nodes in the U.S. chart. There's the dates of the 3 Pluto conjunctions in 2022. And of course, as of this recording on May 30th, Pluto's retrograde at about 23 Cap, Saturn's retrograde at 20 Cap, and Mars has entered Cancer, and it's going to come in and trigger the North Node, trigger the natal North Nodes, the transiting North Nodes of the US and us, and then we're going to have the eclipses come in. I didn't put those charts in, so might be just a little intense this summer. It's really going to require you to be able to kind of detach and slow down and go inward and really find your emotional equilibrium, regardless of what happens or takes place in your country or your community or here on planet Earth. I think we have in the United States some real wounded souls wanting to go play war again in the Middle East. I don't think it will happen. I pray it won't happen. I think there will be enough intensity from the public and onto the legislative branch that will this create the event that makes us stand up? Unfortunately, international listeners, in the history of the United States, when the president isn't doing well, he creates a war. Almost always gets him reelected. if somehow Trump does this, may he be the exception to the rule. So just bringing this up. Take a deep breath, everyone. Not trying to get you all to just feel overwhelmed or want to check out and put your head in the sand, but to pretend that these aspects aren't happening, to pretend that these trends are not in front of our face, that's not the way to move forward either. It is to face those Capricorn realities and go, why is this happening? What's creating this? Can we recognize these patriarchal distortions, call them what they are, and start changing things? I do think it's just going to intensify throughout 2019 and 2020 with our U.S. presidential election. And right now we have a chorus of Democratic candidates. We'll see how this unfolds and evolves. And even if we end up with a centrist candidate like Joe Biden, I still think because of what happened last time, everybody will, hold their nose and vote for a Democratic candidate even if they don't want to. However, I think just the conversations that will go on the debate stages will start moving us forward progressively one way or another. Stay tuned. We'll see. Time will tell. Here's where the transiting nodes of the moon will be aspecting the U.S. chart. And let me back up just to show you. As you can see with Pluto's in Capricorn, but we have 4 planets in Cancer. That's Saturn in Libra, the Chiron in Aries. So we've got a wide Cardinal Grand Cross in the United States chart, inclusive versus exclusive that goes on. Excuse me. So here's those dates. And of course, we've already had the first 2, the node square, 3. Nodes to square Saturn in September. I think that will be an interesting one. I think that might be one of the most important ones to watch with the nodal axis transit in the U.S. chart, because when a planet in the sky squares the transiting nodes, when that planet square the nodes is taking place in the heavens, it activates every single person and entity's chart. And so are we going to create skip steps with social responsibility and maturation? Or are we going to fall into those extremes of me versus you? Or is it going to create, will there be some type of event that again makes us all realize that the earth is getting smaller and smaller and smaller? One of the things that is taking place currently on planet Earth, regardless of these transits, is this whole concept of globalization. The younger souls that are here, the Pluto Libras and Scorpios, they're going, duh, what do you guys think? Whereas the Pluto Cancers and perhaps some of the Pluto Leos, it's still my way or the highway. I'm going to raise my tariffs. No, I'm going to raise my tariffs. And boy, oh boy, I live in the middle of that country right now, and it's getting pretty scary. And especially, let me quote you a little climate change fact here. By this time of the year, our state typically has somewhere like 70 to 80% of its corn planted. And I think we have maybe 8 to 10% of the corn planted. That is how flooded we are. We received 10 inches of rain in my community this month of May. We are double our average for right now. It's just wow. Interesting. So there's some real interesting wake-up calls going on in my conservative state. We'll see how it turns out in another year and a half. So the nodal axis transit in Cancer-Capricorn, it's, the nodes are emotional. And so everything is going to be an emotional trigger. And when we're fearful, we resort back to security. And when we are emotionally secure, especially inwardly secure, we can move forward. We can take the bigger choice, so to speak. Stay tuned. We are all going to live through it. I wrote out some little details for you. Patriarchal distortions exposed in its extremes. If you're following any of the U.S. politics, there are those who are starting to say we have a constitutional crisis going on amongst the three branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. That good old emotional security again. And I'm rooting for those Pluto and Libras because they have their first quarter squares going on. And so they've got the tension to try and move forward and do something about it. Versus, say, all of the Pluto and Cancers that are still with us. And perhaps many might be pretty entrenched in their ways yet of, imperialistic U.S. What's that? There's a phrase they use about the U.S. being so great or something like that. So in the United States, many astrologers always talk about how that Sun in Cancer square to Saturn in Libra has always been a debate throughout the history of our country of whether to include or exclude people. And of course, if you look at the beginnings of our country and what we did to the Native Americans here, it wasn't very pretty. And so here is the debate as it will continue to be activated in the United States over the next year of the transiting nodes here. Of course, what we also see going on is consensus society trying to put all the female gender back into more traditional roles. They are deliberately passing unconstitutional anti-abortion laws in the states to try and get it to the Supreme Court and overturn our female constitutional right to an abortion. I think that one's going to intensify even more over the next year. However, just like it did at the Women's March in January of 2017, it is motivating the women in this country. Stand up and do something. And, you want to take care of the baby before it's born, you got to take care of the baby after it's born as well. I also think at some point here before Pluto leaves Capricorn, and maybe this nodal axis transit might trigger it, we're going to start looking at corporations. I don't remember the year, I didn't look it up, but somewhere along the line in our recent history, the Supreme Court of the United States gave corporations the same standing of personhood as the two-leggeds. And ever since then, it's just, it has been by the corporation, of the corporation, for the corporations in our country. So will we have some mergers that go on that just get to the point where people say no? If you look at all these huge tech companies, there are those that's Democratic candidates that say we need to break up Facebook. We need to break up the social medias. Stay tuned. I already spoke a little bit about the whole money thing. I think there will be another recession. Will it happen 2019, 2020 with these transits? I don't know. I think that the powers that be will try and hold up the stock market as much as they can for as long as they can. They're already in the midst of it. They will not get past 2021-22. In 2021, transiting Neptune in Pisces will oppose natal U.S. Neptune in Virgo, square natal U.S. Mars in Gemini. And throughout history, when outer planets have made harsh aspects to that Mars-Neptune square in Gemini Virgo, the stock market has crashed. What will also happen in 2021 is, let me get this right. Saturn will be in Aquarius, and it will be making last quarter squares to Uranus in Taurus. That is also another historical time period. So we have one affecting the United States chart transits in 21. We have a global one with the Saturn-Uranus squares, which historically, again, have created upsets. And so there's another worldwide recession coming, and it will probably be harder to move out of. However, as I showed you in those screens before, banking on the people, there's a groundswell of public banking going on, and nobody, research Germany, I think they're about 74% public banks. They're not going through the downswings we are. They have the anti-immigration stuff going on. Research India. There was a time period when both Canada and Australia had their public banks going on. Japan has their postal banks. And that is another great example. And there are Democratic candidates who are wanting to turn the U.S. post office into public banks. So for every fear, how do we find hope? Okay. All right, let me move on. I just put in these aspects of transiting Jupiter through Sag and Capricorn with the U.S. chart to show you how active Jupiter is in addition to the Pluto transit to natal Pluto. And I also put in the Saturn transits through Capricorn with the U.S. chart in that Cardinal Grand Cross to show you how active those are as well. Finally, Pluto's planetary nodes are quite active. Well, not finally on the planetary nodes for a moment. 2017 to 2020, Pluto's conjuncting its own south node, opposing its north node, not to mention the U.S. and Donald Trump's chart. 2018 and 19 are those strongest years. So this is also why here in the United States we're seeing so much of this go on. Also in 2019, Saturn's retrograde cycle is activating Pluto's south node, north node. 2020, Jupiter does it with Pluto's south node, north node. I took this slide from another class I did, and I left these articles in here. I love thenation.com. These are two articles over the Pentagon never getting audited in the United States when every other agency is. And that's the article that Alexandria Ocasio, that young representative from New York, got in trouble over. And then another article on the overkill of what we spend on our military and what the Bolton and Pompeo are trying to do in the United States. Both good articles to look up and educate yourself if you want. But this also, again, just bringing this point home one more. All the transiting planets in Capricorn, the nodal axis transit in Cancer-Capricorn of the moon, they're activating Pluto's nodes left and right in the sky, in addition to these charts, in addition to our own charts. Here's Donald Trump's chart. And this is a slide I previously used, so I just brought that in there. And basically to show you is here's where the transiting nodes are up here 2019-20. Here's where the nodes when they go into Gemini, Sagittarius in 2021. I just left that up there for reference in regards to that. But here's the transiting nodes in Cancer-Capricorn on Donald Trump's cardinal planets. Back up again. As you can see right here, he has got this activated square in Cancer-Libra. And so here's where the planets go over that. And with his, that transiting south node, 5th house, facing realities of personal need for control, old emotional securities attached to being in charge. That north node, Cancer, 11th house, the intent is emotional objectivity. And for him, it's emotional victimization and anger. I am not a fan of Donald Trump, and I make no excuses for it. I'm tired of people telling me you need to treat him better. It's a two-way street. And so let's just look. ruler of the South Node in Donald Trump chart, Saturn, is in its opposite sign, Cancer, and it is extremely activated right now by the transit of the nodes, and he's getting ready to have Pluto oppose Saturn, then Jupiter, and his Venus. And so will this guy kind of detach and back up and wake up? Or will him and his family really have some intense emotional crises based upon their prior actions? Transiting North Node in Cancer, here's his natal moon ruler, conjunct his South Node. Very, very activated by the transits of Jupiter in Sagittarius right now. Going to be activated in the coming years with the eclipses going on. The eclipses 2020 are going to be active in his chart all over the place. The intent here would be to emotionally wake up, would be to, heal the inner wounded child. And there is a possibility that his emotional past and all of his extremes of emotional behavior are going to catch up with him. He could get pretty ugly because it's not easy when consensus has a fall from grace, and especially when you're out there on the world stage as strong as he is. It may be what's necessary, though, for the good of the planet. It may be what's necessary for his own soul. I also included just some brief words. This is from another slide, and I thought, this is so what's going on with these planets and the nodal axis in Cancer-Capricorn. We are already through with Leo Aquarius, exposing all the elitism, hubris, control issues, racism, and of course those who put their heads in the sand and just blindly follow him because they have the same beliefs. Cancer-Capricorn starting to expose that emotional immaturity and showing everything that he and his family have done for personal monetary gains before they were in office, while they were in office. Any of you who followed the Mueller report, that guy was one smart cookie moving things out to the states to handle on a financial basis, investigating, because you can't pardon yourself with state things when you're guilty on that state level. And of course, we still have that nodal axis in Gemini Sag to come up. More on that in the future as we move through that. So, opportunities. What does it mean back to us on very personal levels? This is where, again, we review the maturation process in our life. Where do each of us need to grow up, regardless of what our chronological age is? How do we accept responsibility for whatever the current circumstances are in our life? What are the changes I need to make in my world? How do we review and evolve any of our work and career choices? I have too many planets in the outer signs. I'm too collective. This also includes on a social level. Evolving social standards and social responsibilities, maturing on a social level. It's asking us to address any familial karma, evolving how we parent ourselves, how we parent our parents if we're in that situation, our children in that situation, and of course, how do we heal our own inner wounded child? And when we mature into being an adult on a soul level, we recognize, regardless of our familial past, soul chooses its incarnation, consciously or unconsciously. Soul chooses its parents. And so we learn to detach and let go from playing the victim and it's my parents' fault or my job's fault or my life's fault. That emotional maturation then allows us to mature into the world, and we take responsibility for ourselves, in the world, in our family, regardless. And that is one of the best ways to heal the familial karma rather than project it forward into another lifetime and another lifetime. Then that also includes the social parenting, immigration, poverty, adoption, abortion, healthcare, privatization of prison systems, the variety of social support systems, you name the country, that are kind of, falling apart, that need to be rebirthed. So we all are doing this on a personal level, and everything we do personally for ourselves then energetically is involved on how we change it on a collective level. I think I already talked about the Saturn climate events probably being one of those cataclysms with evolution that then forces all of these Capricorn realities to wake up because we have no other choice. This is one of my favorite slides. Violence is the method by which the ruthless few can subdue the passive many. Nonviolence is a means by which the active many can overcome the ruthless few. And of course, this is a quote from Jonathan Schell, who is a progressive author. All right, thank you very much. 65 minutes. Questions. I can end or I can answer questions. I didn't follow anything, and if there were any questions that popped up, apologies. I get too involved in sharing, so questions from anybody?
Okay, if there are any questions, just unmute and ask your question.
Did I shock everybody?
Oh, that's unusual. There are no questions. Okay, a final call for questions.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Just had a quick question as to how, I'm a bit confused as to how to look at one's moon in relation to the transiting nodes, especially since the nodes are in the Saturn Cancer axis.
Yes, gotcha. Well, let's just say, first of all, on a generic level, with all these north nodes in Cancer and the transiting north node in Cancer, there's a lot of emotional triggers going on. If you feel on a generic level that you're more emotional than normal, that is why. And so with the fact that the north node of the moon is always about evolving ourselves emotionally, it means that we have to take these emotional triggers and go inward and ask, what is triggering me? I didn't speak to this, but it comes to the archetype of Cancer, where all of the emotions are condensed down into those 2 cycles of withdrawal and animation. Going along in life, something triggers us, we withdraw, we go inward. That withdrawal or inward cycle is the healing part. It's where we look at the why. It's where we try to inwardly listen to what our emotions are trying to say to us. And then as an adult, can we just love ourselves? Can we take some deep breaths? Can we just say, I am doing the best I can do. I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. I am okay. And reach for some of that emotional healing to give us some sense of equilibrium and inner peace, regardless of the chaos. And then we go back into that animation side and we go out into the world and we do something about it. The broader part of the north nodes of, say, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto being in Cancer, their intent is to return us to more inclusive or matriarchal principles. You know, if we, go back far enough in history to what we want to call the agrarian wandering societies, the caveman, we survived as a village. And just because we have all these modern conveniences doesn't mean isolation is not emotional peace. And so those north nodes of those 3 planets and where their transits are right now, and especially when they go retrograde in Capricorn and point towards Cancer, they're really trying to reactivate us on emotional levels, individually and collectively, to love ourselves, to love our neighbor, to love the planet, to really recognize that when us two-leggeds are in these physical bodies with these Capricorn skins, but we are a body of senses. One of my favorite Jeffrey Wolf Green quotes is, evolution takes place through the emotional body. You can have all the spiritual wisdom in the world. You can have all the mental intellect there is. But until you live it through the experience of life, you don't integrate it. It doesn't evolve within you. So we're all emotionally triggered, and we all have an emotional opportunity to love ourselves deeper, better, unconditionally, and then vibrate that into the planet. Make sense? Help?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Most welcome.
Thank you, Kim. That was good.
You're most welcome.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much from you. I appreciate your work, your body of work, I should say. I'm new, so be patient with me. So I'm getting a good grip of the nodal axis, and I feel that I'm experiencing these nodal shifts in my life, and I'm feeling them very strongly. I have a black moon Lilith at 23 degrees Capricorn in the 7th house, and my north node is in the 1st house in Cancer. I'm a Cancer ascendant in the 1st house, and that's where the north node is. It seems to be playing out for me in self in relation to others in a very strong way. And this black moon Lilith seems to be stirring the pot, so to speak, and having groups, betrayal by groups, or hidden themes, misdirection, manipulation by Capricornian energies. How does one grapple with this? In other words, I have the sense that to read it as North Node Cancer, 1st house, retreat and take care of myself, nurture myself, live by myself, try ride these energies out and take care of myself, because every time I try to do others and live with others or create groups for change, I seem to get this function of the black moon Lilith with Pluto and Capricorn and all of the planet alignment, the stellium there, as if you're bringing the light and the matriarchal message, it isn't always received, and it seems like the group turns on the message. I don't know how And I'm trying very hard to work with these energies and be a change agent, bring the message. But as a messenger, I keep getting my head cut off. I keep, in other words, experiencing this very personally in my personal life, and it makes me want to retreat. And I'm sure others listening are having similar experiences, maybe not to the extreme. So how do we rise as the matriarch with so much in the patriarch structure? It's a huge structure. Mm-hmm. And I'm really challenged with how to do this, because I have not been successful, to be honest, with bringing the change. I seem to get this personal cataclysm. I just had another cataclysmic event, and I rode the energy. As you beautifully said, don't resist it. I went with it, and great information was gained, a lot of soul release and a lot of old patterns released. I really saw myself and how I was drawing these cataclysms to myself. Now that I know, how do you function with the knowing? Now we know, okay, a lot of us are excelling, are changing, are going through the change. We're not resisting. I'm one of those warrior types. I'm going with it. But what do you do once you have the revelation? How do we bring it? I'm really stumped with this Black Moon Lilith. I feel like it's a curse, so to speak. It's like, I mean,
sure.
You know, I'm like, oh man, I got it in Capricorn. Thanks a lot. You know, so I learn how to work.
Okay, excuse me, Liv, we're running out of time. If Kim Marie would like to respond.
Definitely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. First of all, it's hard to address questions in a chart without knowing the whole chart, okay? Because you only have part of the situation. So I'm going to address this in a more generic form for you, okay? So that it's relevant for everyone. In evolutionary astrology, there's this concept of karmic retribution versus evolutionary necessity. You cannot assume if you're raped in this life, it happened because you raped someone in a past life. Sometimes you will have extreme examples happen to wake you up. And so you've always got to do the observe and correlation within the chart. And you always have to give a soul a freedom to understand for itself and intuit for itself whether it feels it's karmic retribution that I make amends for, or it's evolutionary necessity that I have to stand up for. So I just share that in general terms. I'm not making any decision either way for you in that regard. When we come up against the patriarchal distortions in the feminine, it can be real hard because, for example, in the consensus political worlds, that's almost the only way you can play the game is if you play the patriarchal female. So it goes back to that phrase that I used with my poster. Nothing is as strong as true gentleness. Nothing is as gentle as true strength. It requires you to stand up for yourself, hold healthy boundaries, experience the situation, judge less, and really say, why is this happening and what is it to teach me? And then how do I do the dirty laundry and give it out back clean? So there was a bunch of cliches right there, but specifically I did that to just cut to the point. So it really is holding that center of loving yourself enough that you don't give the patriarchal distortions of hate back regardless of the circumstances. Make sense? Very brief. Easier said than done, okay?
Okay, Kim Marie, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of your meeting. Looking forward to catching you next time. And would everybody please thank Kim Marie? You can unmute now and thank Kim Marie.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kim. Brilliant as always.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy.